You may or may not know this about me, but Halloween is my favorite holiday of the year. I just love the candy, and especially I like the scary movies. That being said, now going to take a look at my top 10 favorite horror movies. As a bit of a disclaimer that I forgot to mention in my last video, there will probably be spoilers for some of these movies that I'm going to talk about, and these are all my opinion, so don't get mad at me if your favorite movie isn't on here. At number 10, we have your grandma's least favorite movie, Rosemary's Baby. This movie is a classic and a little overrated in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy my time with this movie and I would recommend it. It's just, it just wasn't really for me. I wasn't a huge fan of the tones of the movie and it felt really preachy at times. But I mean, the characters and the acting, the writing, it was all just phenomenal. All in all, a solid horror classic. At number 9, we have The Conjuring. This section is going to be very brief because I haven't seen this movie in a while, but it is very nostalgic for me because it is one of the first horror movies I ever saw. But from what I do remember from this movie is that it had really good tension and a few solid scares. On the downside, I remember that this movie had a lot of jump scares and was filled with quite a few tropes. So all in all, I'm assuming this movie is probably worse than I remember it, but it's still going on this list just for nostalgia reasons. At number 8, we have an absolute classic, which is the 1980s Poltergeist. When I first watched this movie, I immediately could pick out that the characters are written beautifully, and it has really, really good family vibes. Like, the family does feel like an actual family, not necessarily just a screen time family. Some other things to note with this movie are that the first act is incredible, and I loved it. The second act was kind of boring, and it's just, your run-of-the-mill ghost catching stuff, and then the third act was pretty good. Overall, I really liked this movie and would recommend it, and I thought Spielberg did a really good job with it. One little final thing is this movie is rated PG, which is kind of crazy. This movie is pretty scary, at least to me it was pretty scary. And there was this one scene, and if you've seen this movie, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's the scene where the guy rips the skin off of his head, and I don't really think that belongs in a PG movie. I think this movie definitely should have gotten an R rating. That being said, if you're trying to get into horror movies but can't really find a good one to start with, I would definitely suggest this one because it is scary. Yes, it does have scares, but it's pretty tame. It's not really that hardcore, so you could definitely get into it if you aren't very much of a horror movie person. Number 7 is Silence of the Lambs, and unlike Poltergeist, this movie is pretty hardcore, and I wouldn't recommend it for the faint of heart. All that aside, this movie is amazing on every level, from its writing of the characters to its tension. Man, I just love this movie. My favorite parts of this movie is obviously Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. I think he does an incredible job as him and definitely deserved the Oscar. Some other good stuff in this movie is Jodie Foster. She does a great job as Clarice. She's a really good actress. Another thing is kind of like this rivalry thing that Clarice and Hannibal have going. I think it's really fun in this movie, if you will. As far as scares go in this, it's not your typical slasher psycho killer thing. It's more reserved. It saves its blood and gore and stuff for the moments that will really hit hard, which in my opinion is this movie's greatest strength, is it doesn't have any jump scares from what I can remember. Overall, it's a classic I would recommend. At number 6, we have The Cabin in the Woods, and first time I saw this movie, I immediately fell in love with it. From its self-aware jokes to the self-aware writing, I just think this movie knows exactly what it wanted to be, and it absolutely nailed it. A lot of the scares in this movie are jump scares and tension-based things, which I don't really find much of a problem in this movie like I would others, because it's trying to be like your run-of-the-mill, slasher flick. But I think it works really well for this movie and what it's kind of going for. As I said before, it's super self-aware. And I mean, honestly, the scares are pretty alright. I mean, they aren't anything exceptional, but I don't necessarily have a problem with them. But probably my favorite part of this movie was the amazing effects, especially in the elevator scene. I won't spoil it too much, but there are some really, really good monster effects in that scene. My last thing to talk about this movie is the ending. I think it's absolutely incredible. It subverts your expectations, and it just has a super meta feeling, kind of punchline-ish ending. Overall, I love this movie, and if you've never seen it, I would highly recommend it, and try to stay away from spoilers so you go into it completely blind. At number 5, we have Get Out, Jordan Peele's first movie, which I think is kind of crazy because this is a brilliant movie that intrigued me from start to end. From its amazing symbolism to its outstanding tone to its witty jokes and its pretty good scares, I just really enjoyed my time with this movie. More on the symbolism present in this movie. It's not preachy, like kind of like in Rosemary's Baby. It's a lot more subtle, which I really liked. This movie may not strike a chord in you like it did me, but if it does, it's going to be great. One final thing to note is I think this movie's ending is really good. It subverts your expectations, kind of like Cabin in the Woods. So I didn't want to play any of the trailer because the trailer does kind of spoil it. So sorry if it looked kind of bland. But if you haven't ever seen this movie, I would definitely recommend it, but I'd stay away from the trailer and just go in blind. At number 4, we have Evil Dead 2. Now, I don't know if this movie is necessarily a horror movie. I'd probably consider it more of a comedy, but I think it has enough horror elements to the point where I would consider it to be a horror movie. First of all, this movie is hilarious. Most of the jokes hit really hard. The humor in this movie is extremely bizarre and definitely not for everybody. It's just super gory and bloody, which it's funny to me, but it might not be funny for everyone. As far as negatives go, the movie is kind of boring when it slows down and tries to, give characters stuff and advance the plot a little. It doesn't really work with overall tone of the movie. Most of the time, it's just supposed to be like just a gore fest and laughing. Another thing is the exposition of this movie is literally just narration at the beginning of it, and that's all you get, which isn't bad, but it's just something to mention. A couple final things to mention are the effects. Coming out sometime in the early 80s or mid 80s, I don't really remember. It doesn't look amazing, but for the most part, it looks pretty good. And on a final note, Bruce Campbell is perfect for the role of playing Ash. He's just so funny. All in all, a blast to watch and a perfect 3 a.m. and bored type of movie. At number 3, we have the Stanley Kubrick horror classic, The Shining. The Shining has a lot of near perfect or perfect elements to it. Its writing, its cinematography, its score, its casting, especially Jack Nicholson. He's phenomenal in this movie. The setting, it's just all great. That being said, there is one pretty major problem with this movie. It's pacing. This movie is extraordinarily slow. It's just dialogue and more dialogue and just the same 3 characters interacting. But that being said, I do think that its extraordinarily slow pace kind of helps with the overall atmosphere and how this movie scares you. This movie's got no jump scares, but still somehow manages to be really psychologically scary because you don't really know what's going to happen next because there's just crazy stuff happening that you don't really know if it's real or not. And going off of not knowing if it's real or not, the ending of this movie is amazing. It really makes you think about it. Just the entire movie. To wrap up, I think that this movie's hotel design and like the impossible hallways and stuff, I think that's just all brilliant, and I really like the set design. Yeah, so overall, just a really fun horror classic to watch. And number two, probably to me, the scariest movie on this list, Paranormal Activity. Objectively, this movie isn't a marvel by any means. It's not incredible, but I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it. I mean, it's really scary, so I wouldn't, if you're kind of a scaredy cat, I probably wouldn't jump into this movie. Before I go into detail about some of the scares and my thoughts on it, everything in this movie is just solid. I mean, the way it's filmed, it's like a found footage home video type deal thing. And I think that's a pretty cool idea. It's kind of like Blair Witch in a way. But yeah, I mean, like I said, objectively, this movie isn't great. But now we're going to talk about, in my opinion, this movie's greatest strength. Its scares and tension. This movie really banks off of like jump scares, but they don't like immediately like just make you like go, it doesn't like just release all the tension that was previously built up. Like, it's just, it like keeps you on your toes even after like the big boo kind of moment. And I really like that. It's probably not for everyone because jump scares are kind of cheap, but like I said, it was pretty cool. Overall, a really scary, intense movie that I enjoyed a lot. To end this list off at number one, not only is this my favorite horror movie, it's also probably one of my favorite movies of all time. John Carpenter's classic horror, The Thing. First and foremost, the most prominent thing and my favorite part of this movie is the effects. They're incredible. This movie came out in the 80s, and all of the practical effects still look incredible to this day, which just amazes me. This movie's got great setting. Just these guys in a research base stuck in the middle of nowhere. It's got really good atmosphere, really good tension. This movie is borderline perfect, in my opinion. Kurt Russell and most of the casting was great. This movie also holds one of my favorite cinematic scenes in history, the wire test scene. If you've never seen this movie, I would highly recommend that you watch it this Halloween or whenever you want to, really. It's just amazing. I just love it. And really, to put the icing on the cake, the beginning of this movie is just confusing enough to where it like keeps you on your toes and they're like, ooh, what's going to happen next? But not confusing enough to where it's like, okay, I really don't know what's going on. Not only is the beginning really good, the ending I really liked. It's kind of cliffhangery, but you still get like the closure of what a normal movie would end like. Overall, I love this movie and you should give it a try. So I hope you liked my new video. Like if you're feeling generous, comment below what your favorite horror movie is. And if you noticed I got a new profile picture, that's because my first fan art ever made by my friend Nate. It's incredible. The craftsmanship on this is absolutely unmatched by even Picasso. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.